Wow. Now let's point out the obvious real quick. We are in a new logo seat. Yes, it's an upgrade. The channel's been doing so well. We get a whole new mansion to live in. A logo suite that seat that swivel. Holy moly! A logo seat that swivels, reclines, bounces, hydraulics on it, everything like that. So I just, first of all, need to say it's only possible with the support that you guys have given me, and that means so much to me. Loco Seat 1, 2, if there's been 3, I mean, success on an unprecedented level. So, new Loco Seat, same Loco takes, but obviously they're getting more and more Loco, and it's the same Loco Man. Okay, let's get into it. What are we going to talk about? I feel like I don't even need to explicitly address this or directly address it or whatever because it's going to be really obvious, but this is the tank population. Where is this article that came out on Wowhead? Oh, I mean, I don't even need to say it, but like obviously I have some takes on this. Listen, I've been a tank player. I've been a tank player since season 3 of Shadowlands and Keys, and I've been a tank player since the Gallywix raid, season 2 of the War Within. And that's because I always had a war within myself. That war within myself was the need to play a tank, to be the bus driver, to lead some jazzy routes. And people, I brought this up in one of my past videos. People are always talking all this BS about tanks, always being mean, always being angry about these roles. The jungler in League, the tank player in Keys, in Raid, and that's fine. Some people commented on the WoWHUD comments, and we'll get to that, to the comments about how that's one of the reasons why people don't want to play tank. Listen, here's the loco take. I don't think that's why. I think that might be a factor, but I don't think most people really understand the amount of hate that tanks get anyway. Like, I think people laugh about it and it's a joke, but I think that, like, when you sign up to be a tank player for just like a one off key, not like that you yourself are going to transition into becoming a tank as a main, but I don't think that that person who is going to just like queue up for a +10 is expecting to get flamed. And if they are, they're probably not like realizing that that is something that they'll deal with regularly. And I think even as someone who does play tank, it's not like you experience that every single key anyway. Like tanks obviously get like T's and things like that, and tanks take a lot of responsibility and sometimes get a lot of criticism that is unwarranted, and sometimes that is warranted. But I don't think that that in and of itself is a reason why people are not queuing out to play tank, personally. One of the things that the commenters talk a lot about too is that one of the reasons that people don't play tank is because they don't want to play Brewmaster. And the argument is that like Brewmaster is like the only tank that people will play with. I think that's also BS. I mean, I think that if you play an off meta tank in like a +10 or something, like as you can see here, this picture is showing a +10. That's not the case. That like people aren't going to take a prop paladin or a blood DK into their weekly +10 and they're going to wait for a brewmaster because you're waiting for so long to get a tank anyway that you're just taking the first tank that's available as long as they're not like extremely undergeared or have like never even done a key and they're signing up for your +10 or something like that. So I think that's also a pretty bad take. That would be a cold take and in fact a false take, not a loco hot take. So let's just go through it. Oh, so like, why do people not want to play tank? I don't know if I should say that now, if I should get to it later. I think I'm gonna let you think about it. And let's just work through it, and then I'll share my opinion. Why are people so harsh on tanks? I already addressed this, but the reason why people are so harsh on tanks is because people like to scapegoat. Reason number one. Reason number two is that a lot of times, and this is I think one of the key differences between playing tank and playing other roles, is that playing a tank means that like when you make a mistake, it's really obvious. If you're a DPS player and you're doing bad DPS, or even just below maximum DPS, it doesn't really matter. You're not going to fail a plus 10 because you're a bad DPS player. If you're missing kicks or you're just simply not kicking, you're probably also not going to fail a 10 because you're a bad DPS player. But if you're a bad tank player or a new tank player, and maybe you try a route that you've never tried before, maybe even a DPS pulls something by accident, and nobody else in the group recognized that it was that guy's fault, and now you're tanking it, which something happened to me in my 18 that I just did this week, where somebody said to me, that pull is illegal, and I said, yeah, then don't pull extra packs. And we still killed it, we still timed the key, obviously, not only are my hands clean, but they're strong, and I can handle that. It wasn't really a problem for a man like me, but that's an example of unwarranted tank hate. So like even when mistakes happen by other people, sometimes that fault falls back onto the tank to the group's perspective. So why are people so harsh on tanks? It's because their mistakes are much more obvious. And if, as I said, if you're a bad DPS player, you're still going to time your weekly 10. You will be stonewalled by a terrible tank in a plus 10. If they're dying over and over and you're like unable to progress through the key, you won't time your key. But you can carry a freaking like drooling little DPS passenger princess, no problem. It's not going to be a super fast key. It's not going to be a super efficient key. It's going to feel harder than it should, whatever. But nonetheless, you'll still time the key. Similarly, and I've experienced this, I'm playing as my augmentation evoker, which stay tuned for the Play Aug with Me series coming soon, sometime in the next decade. A lot of times you'll be playing with the tank who's pulling like one pack at a time. And not only are they pulling one pack at a time, but they're pulling like one pack at a time. They're killing it like halfway, then they pull another like one mob, and then they can't do a bigger chain like that actually does make sense because they have like these like remnants of pulls from the past that they're carrying along with them, and it's too much to like continue to chain. So you just get these like super awkward, disjointed pulls and chains. And that's really obvious as a DPS player. And you're sitting there as a DPS player, like, I want to push my cooldowns, but like, I don't want to push my cooldown on like this one extra mob that they pulled in when the rest of the pack is at like 25% health. And like, it's just awkward and feels bad. And that's really obvious to point at the tank and say, like, you made a mistake. But the thing, so like people are really harsh on tanks, harsh because of this. I don't think that's harsh. I think that's actually fair criticism. Or they're harsh on tanks for mistakes that like aren't really the tank's fault. Like somebody pulls something extra. Maybe the DPS is bad, and therefore a pull that is hard or shouldn't be hard becomes hard because like things aren't dying quickly. People are missing kicks, for example, and they're saying, "Well, this pull is too crazy." No, it's not. You just are not a good player, and you're like not able to look in the mirror and think about what you could do better as a DPS player. So in some cases, I think it's warranted. In some cases, it's not. But I think like the main distinction between the two roles, and I'm avoiding healers here as well, as so far in this discussion or at this point. A key distinction between the two roles is that a lot of DPS players are also really bad players. They just simply do not have the spotlight on them, and when they're making mistakes, it doesn't immediately become obvious and like stop or break the key right away. Let's move on. What else does Wowhead here have to say? Tank Square since day one. I mean that's just a fact. And I think that like what this person says here, so try to make tanking easier effectively, is not really the right way of going about doing it. Because the problem with this, especially if it's just a push W route, which I think is like overcorrecting for the problem of maybe tanking is difficult, which I think is fair, or maybe there's more responsibility that falls into the tank for preparation, which I think is fair. To just do a push W route means that for those people who do enjoy playing tanks, such as myself, if you're just gonna make the class like absolutely binky central mode, like I don't want to play it. If I can't do interesting and aggressive pulls, if I can't like try to squeeze as much juice out of this little key orange as possible, because like it's just impossible to do more, that's really boring. An example of that, which is like not totally true because you can pull through the wall, but like the Magister's Terrace first pull. That pull feels terrible. To have the first pull of the key, which is historically like the most juicy, hard hitting pull. Everyone's got cooldowns, got lust, all of this. And you're just fighting like five mobs that aren't even particularly difficult. So you don't even use lust. Like it feels awful. If you're gonna make every single pull in a key like this, follow this type of design philosophy of just push W and everything is like really simple and straightforward, that isn't enjoyable and that's not fun. Um, However, to make like one kind of small exception to that rule is almost every season there's one or two dungeons that are pretty like set in stone how you pull them. An example in this one would be Skyreach. Skyreach is like almost impossible to fail on the count. I don't even know how you could possibly mess up the count, to be honest. You kind of just follow the same route. Maybe you don't pull as much as somebody else does or something, but it's like a very straightforward dungeon. An example of that in Shadowlands would be Spires of Ascension. Also pretty like one route. It kind of is just towards the end of the season, around the area before the third boss. But sometimes it's nice to have those as a tank player because a lot of times I think like tanking can be kind of like difficult to gather things and like more complicated routes and things. So to have like one or two dungeons which are like, okay, like there's no big braining happening here. I just push the W route. Like that's nice sometimes as a bit of like a relief. But when every single dungeon is like that, or if every dungeon were to be like that, I think it would feel awful. I don't think that the way that you fix this problem is to make tanking like a brainless activity. I think the thing that makes tanking fun is the fact that it does require a lot of like thinking. Your rotation is not just like a DPS rotation where it's you push everything when you're supposed to, or like in this very set in stone pattern or priority order. There becomes a lot more of like in the moment decisions and stuff, which is makes it fun. And that's the reason why I've enjoyed tanking is it doesn't feel so like set in stone formulaic. And that's fun. Once you become like good and comfortable tanking, it kind of falls into that anyway. But I think that there's like a little bit more room for creativity, which is fun. So like I do think that you can make the classes a little bit easier. I think some of what they did going into this season had the right idea. An example of that was like some of the VDH changes where it's like you don't have to stack your Painbringer, you don't have to stack your like whatever the I have DH up, so Frailty is called. You don't have to stack that. Like that's kind of nice, but they kind of like again overcorrected for it, where like you completely reduce the skill ceiling, and not only that, but the classic is just pretty squishy. It needs a lot of external assistance now. So I think like the idea was kind of correct, but the implementation was not. It's not so great. I'm also not sure why I'm getting this ad. I mentioned this the other day. Still interested in becoming a correctional officer. Like I don't think I ever was interested, so I'm not really sure about the wording on that one. Tanking is way easier to learn than I imagined. If you've ever oh, let's see this. I don't think I read this before. If I was a DPS player, some bosses straight up don't have mechanics. I mean, yeah, this is crazy. Like this season, honestly, there's like more. It seems like this season and also last expansion, there's been more times than ever where like there's way less to kick, way less tank busters, and things like that, which I don't necessarily love, but I think it's fine. Like I think like what they have currently in this season is like a balance which like I'm okay with, and I think it's a nice I think in that aspect they did a good job of sort of simplifying it a bit and making it a little bit easier tanking while still maintaining like enough skill expression and it's like still interesting enough. Um, but this guy brings up an interesting point. It is easy. So he says. I mean, it's not easy, but it's like not as easy as or it's not as hard as he expected. So if people think it's hard or whatever, what could the problem be? Let's keep churning on that idea. Oh, and that's all they got there. Okay, so we'll look at the comments in a second, but then I guess let me give my take on it. Why is there a tanking shortage? One, because there's like way more prep that needs to go into it. Like if you also like there's no tools in the game to actually like tank. The highlighting the mobs I think is actually like a nice thing that they've added because it does allow for somebody who's in like a smaller key to simply just like go into the key as a tank and give it a shot. Whereas before it's like you can't there's no tool in the game to like see what you're supposed to pull. Obviously, there's the add-on MDT, which one could get Mythic Dungeon tools and look at it themselves. But even then, like if you're not somebody who's familiar with the dungeons or the mobs and the bosses and everything like that, like looking at the MDT map is like kind of tough. Even in some cases, when I'm looking at the MDT map, it's like kind of sometimes hard to like look at that bird's eye view map and then like think about like which mob exactly is which mob, like especially when there's different layers to the dungeons or like different altitudes to the dungeon. Example that would be like Pit of Sauron in this current dungeon pool. I feel like sometimes I'm looking at the Pitasaura map, and I'm like, I don't even know exactly like where this mob is. Like, I kind of do, and I kind of think it's this mob, but I don't feel like as confident about it. So like the highlighting of the mobs, I think, is like a good thing to add. But what I think the problem with with tanking is like why people don't want to play it beyond what I just said is that it kind of comes across tanking has a bit of a feeling of like public speaking in a way. Like you are so much in the forefront of the dungeon, so much of the dungeon relies on you. Like I was saying before, you can so easily brick a key on a tank. If you, for example, like have a lag spike for let's say 2 or 3 seconds, right? This weird thing happens in your internet connection. Oh my gosh, you have a lag spike. You will die as a tank, like almost immediately on a hard key. You will just die. Um, and then the key is done. It's just completely over. Which on any other role in the game, like that's not how it works. Like you could lag out as a DPS player and nothing really happens. Like yeah, you slow down the key. Maybe you even do die and you get B-res, whatever. You lose some 15 seconds. Maybe you fail the key because of it, but like probably not. Like as a tank, it's like the amount of responsibility you have is so much, and the fact that that spotlight is on you the entire time, and everybody is like in the bus with you. Like, would you rather be the person in the limo or the limo driver? And like take away the class like idea around that, right? Like, would you rather be the person who's driving the car or the person who can just kind of like sit in the car and chill? Um, and that's I think one of the like reasons why people don't really want to tank so much is it's like way more chill. It's way more nice to just like simply hop onto the game and just kind of walk around as a DPS player, hit your buttons, do some damage and all that type of stuff, and that's it. Whereas if you're a tank player, there's so much more preparation that goes into it. People are being really judgmental of how you're polling. All the DPS players are gonna say some stuff like, not all of them, but like sometimes you get people who are like, oh, these polls suck or whatever. Um, the polls are awkward, like I was saying. Like with tanking, it just takes way more like learning and getting comfortable to the point where you can do bigger polls, to the point where you can like really risk things, and that entire learning process that you're doing, you are standing in front of the class the entire time. Like you are like the one who is leading the group while you're also learning, whereas the other people can kind of like learn in the back without eyes on them. And I think that that gives people a lot of anxiety and stress on top of the fact that like on top of the fact that there's so much more preparation that goes into playing as a tank. If you think too of like if you're fighting a boss and the boss is doing a lot of damage to you, you don't exactly know when you hit a new level of a key, for example, if that tank buster is going to kill you or not. You don't know. You have to get hit by it first. And so maybe you want to use a cooldown to prepare to be hit by this tank buster, very obvious thing. And like maybe it hits you harder than you expected. So now like what you had planned for the next tank buster is actually not enough. And now you need to like adjust your plan basically in your head in real time, and that just causes people stress. And even for me, like it causes me stress if I'm tanking, and I like it. Like I personally enjoy that, but I can understand why other people would shy away from that or feel like they don't want to do that. um so let's look through some of the comments because there's some other things that people bring up which I think are good, and there's a lot of things that people bring up which is like so stupid, like no surprise. These people who are just saying like buff tanks and things like that because like right now the what do you call it, the balance is off. I don't think that's really true. The balance is like actually not as bad as I think it usually is. Like I think obviously Brewmaster is by far the best tank in the game right now, but I think Brewmaster is also like really accessible, which it usually isn't. Um, and I don't think that Brewmaster is like particularly more broken than some of the other tanks have been in the past. Like if you think of the way that VDH was at the end of Dragonflight when it was like when it had the double sigils, and it was able to just like completely utility shut down packs. Like that was way stronger. The DK in season 3 and season 4 of Shadowlands, where it had like infinite rune weapon, dancing rune weapon, and could parry like endlessly. That was insanely broken. Like there's been times where tanks are like actually busted and broken. They're doing like crazy damage. There's just no way you would ever be able to do similarly difficult keys on another tank. Whereas right now, it's like not even really the case with Brewmaster. Other tanks have done pretty much the same level of difficulty as Brewmasters. It's just the population is extremely skewed towards Brewmasters. So like I don't know. I mean, like, I do think that the balance is a problem. I think that if they had better balance across the board, that would obviously help the situation. I just don't think that the balance is like quite as bad as the population shows it to be. But I also don't think that that would change the way that like people want to play tanker now. Because if you say, for example, right now, okay, Brewmaster is so broken, then like that doesn't change the fact that the tanking population is still just like very low because it's not like oh everybody's just playing Brewmaster now who used to be a DPS player. They just don't want to play tank. So like doesn't really seem to make a difference if a tank is strong or not because like that doesn't really sway people away from playing DPS for example or to playing tank. Um, so I don't know. This person says I play DPS because I don't want to be forced into Brewmaster. Kind of the same before. I mean, like also depends like what type of keys are you doing. You like that's even a thing because if you look at like the top keys that are done, at least every key has been done at 20, if not 21, by every tank at the moment. So like let's say you're doing 17s, 18s, 19s, or lower. You're not going to be stonewalled by the class selection. That's just like completely BS because other people have already done those those have played those tanks at a higher key level. This guy saying tanks have been toxic. I mean, totally justified. Tanks should be as toxic as they want to be. There's nothing wrong with that. Search for groups that have a tank or healer. It's kind of bad advice. I mean, like you could do that, but like good luck being selected anyway. I do think you could just start your own key, and like eventually a tank will come. But I was in no tank prison yesterday on my augmentation evoker. By the way, I look forward to the play all with me series. I think this is kind of a take, like this guy's saying, like if you just are waiting for one specific tank that is like extremely geared or extremely high over the right spec or something like that, like if you're playing in a high, if you're playing high keys, if you're doing like 18s, 19s, 20s, like tanks will sign up. Like you will definitely get the tank that you want pretty quickly. Like there's not really a shortage of people applying to your keys at high ratings. I think though, also what I found is that around like plus 10, 11 seems to be very easy to get people showing up too. So like if you're specifically waiting for one spec or you're specifically waiting for like some high IO player or something like that to come carry your key, that's another story. But I feel like it's not really hard to fit a group around that key level. What I find to be difficult is around that like 13, 14-ish range where it's like not really high keys, like between let's say 13 and like 16. These aren't high keys. So it's not like people are bottleneck trying to like scrape out little bits of IO, but they're not low enough keys where you have the people who just like want to do their weeklies coming in. Because around 10, it's like, well, I'll hop in on my tank sometimes to just do a plus 10 because I just need a vault key. But like, I'm not going to do a 15 for a vault key. You know, it's just like, why would I do that? Unless I'm testing something and like I want to see like something that like maybe hits me at least a little bit. But yeah. Okay, this person's saying the only thing that can be improved is the tank ratio. Have raids, two tanks, four shields, DPS has one tank on what is DD per DD damage dealer? So you're saying like the ratio of raid? I don't know, maybe like that would make a difference, but I just feel like that's like really fundamentally changing the game in a way that like and like to what end, you know, just so you have like some more people queuing up for tens. I don't know. Attractive tank specs to play. I think that's kind of a real thing. I don't think the tank design is like so great this season. I think that they're like a little bit boring-ish, like ish. I kind of enjoy them and I like the simplicity a bit, but like I don't think these are like any of these tanks are, like my favorite that I've ever played. I much preferred Shadowlands, Brewmaster. I much preferred Dragonflight, VDH. I much preferred all like almost every other warrior as well before they when they did the ignore pain changes and stuff. So I think that could be kind of true, but again, I don't necessarily like. There's been times where tanks have been really fun, and it's not like everybody's just like lining up to play tanks. Like I don't know. I just feel like there's not really evidence to support that take, and I also feel like this take is like absolutely so stupid. I would love a caster tank shaman spec where use Earth Ellie as a mech suit and use Earth. I mean, like okay, like yeah, I guess that could be cool, but like that also seems like you're just not even tanking. Then you're just like you're ranged tank, which is not really going to translate well into Mythic Plus, like at least as they've designed the game to be, and it just seems like that'd be so broken. You're not even be like I don't know. I don't really know what that means, but yeah, I guess we can all dream up our dream tank spec. Mythic Flex rating, better tank to again. Like I don't know. Like I think like maybe that's kind of true because you maybe have more people playing tanks than need to play in raid or something. But like I just don't think that like completely translates to like the Mythic Plus tank shortage. Because how many people are doing plus tens who are also doing Mythic raid at like a high level anyway? Like I don't know. I just feel like that's not necessarily the way. I've done many seasons where like I wasn't really raiding seriously and I was still doing keys. And I think it's also true vice versa. Like so I don't think just because like you'd be forced to play tank in your like flex mythic raid group that you would like then want to tank keys necessarily. There's also been other seasons where like you have the currency where you can buy raid gear and things like that, and it's not like just because you have someone geared as a tank in raid that you then end up just doing keys to like in a real way. Like I don't think any of these things are like so far have been like really addressing something that would be like boom, now a lot of people are playing tank in keys and like fixing this issue. I think this is kind of true. I think tank like at least in my experience, like playing VDH, it feels like you don't have as much agency. I feel like they took away a lot of tools, and now you're kind of reliant on these like RNG procs to feel safe and have fun. And otherwise, it's like kind of tough, and not in a very fun way. Not in like oh I'm challenged way. In a way where it's like I need a hammer. You know, I need a tool. I need a hammer, and I don't have a hammer to hammer in this nail, so I'm just gonna die instead. I think this is extremely true as well. Like getting a raid spot as a tank is pretty tough because most guilds already have their tanks. I don't know how like relevant that is to this though. Um, he's right. Not all tanks like this, but like nonetheless still warranted because like tanks can do whatever they want to do. I mean, this is real. This is real. But I think like simply like a lot of these things that people are saying like it's always this give Shaman a tank spec like why like you that wouldn't even do anything for you. Like you know like what if it's just a shaman but it plays like a VDH or whatever like. Does that really add anything other than just like, oh, a new spec and it's a tank, so people play it? I mean, that would be a way to get people to play tank. Just simply put in a new tank spec into the game. But like, that doesn't like address any problem, you know, that people are mentioning. And I think like as I'm reading through these comments and like everything that I've heard about people talking to this problem too, is that like at the end of the day, it's just that tanking or like is interesting to a certain type of person who wants to be leading the group, who wants to deal with that stress and all that type of stuff. This is one of the dumbest takes I've ever seen. IO scores being visible for others has been the single most detrimental aspect to Mythic Plus. Like what? First of all, it's always been that way. You've always been able to look up people. Most people had the Raider IO add-on, but like, what does this take even coming from? Like, this guy just sucks at the game. Clearly, no one takes me because I'm not good at the game. I know exactly why people are not taking currently. Perfect. This is exactly. I was looking for an answer, so I think we have one. I'm a career tank with 17 CEs and only really do M plus casually. Get tens done week one. Okay. The main problem with tanking this season, more than any, is the ability to survive. I mentioned my experience just to show how much harder it is to do M plus this season. I don't think his experience necessarily demonstrated that, but fair enough. In previous seasons, surviving was a bit of an afterthought, and you could live any reasonable pull without defensives at the start of the season. I mean, this guy just has never done a hard key in his life, so that's like completely BS. But I guess he's specifically saying like in tens. So here's the problem. Okay, let's get to it. The tank variance is too big, and they have just doubled down on the problems that tanks had before. On pull, all but monk tanks currently have a choice: get aggro slash AoE or build resources to survive. The problem being that the resource builder isn't usually the AoE spell outside of Toll for Paladins. So if it, I don't necessarily think that that is true. Like I kind of see what he's saying, and like I kind of get the point. I don't necessarily think that's true because like let's say you're playing VDH for example, on pull you just like immediately send your brand onto something that like onto a pack that you're pulling, and now you have your defensive going, and like you also he's right that like when you're building up Fury for example, you're not going to be using like an AoE thing. You're not going to be like getting your Painbringer or whatever it's called set up. You're not getting your Frailty set up. These like tiny little um, damage mitigators, but you can immediately pull with a defensive, and that's kind of like how you're supposed to play most tanks anyway. Like, so you could also jump in meta, for example. Like, that's I don't think that's true. Similarly with like Um, with DK, you could like Dancing Rune Weapon on pole, for example. You can Incarn or Barkskin as a druid. So like I don't think that's true, but I do kind of like get where he's coming from a bit, where it's like you do have this decision of like doing damage right off the bat or like the survivability, like kind of. Um, but the part with his take that I don't understand is like I feel like that's just always been the case anyway. Like in two ways. One is that he's right in that like tanks feel squishier now, I think, than they have in the past, especially on pull. Kind of. I mean, I think a lot of the changes they made were specifically to address that. Like some tanks felt squishy on pull. I'm like kind of biased thinking about VDH at the moment, but like I don't know. I think that like that was kind of the point about how they addressed what they did, uh, or how they addressed the problem with what they did. But the reason I don't like completely agree with this take, beyond the things I've said, is that there's always been a tank shortage. So if he's saying, look, in the past tanks were easier to play, okay, well they were still a tank shortage back then, and there's still a tank shortage now. So I don't necessarily think that that is like it doesn't. It's not like them becoming more difficult has like caused a problem that wasn't there previously. Too much effort for so little. I think that's real. I genuinely think that that is like that's actually probably one of the better takes I've seen so far. I think that's pretty real. Tanking is just simply like a little bit harder at like that low level of keys than it is to play other things. And it's like, to what end? Except like I think that the thing that you do get is instant cues. So like that's I guess that's not so little. Who wants to play a tank spec that can easily follow over? Only Brewmasters and Guardians have a chance. I don't know. I've been playing my VDH and I don't feel like I just immediately fall over, but I'm also not terrible at the game. Here's what you get being a tank in today's WoW. Okay, nice. You do no damage. This isn't totally true. I feel like some pulls you absolutely blast, which is fun. But like nonetheless, yes, it's fun to do damage. I agree with that. And there's been seasons where some tanks like really can compete with DPS. Not like overall, I think that would be bad for the game, but like on pulls where it's like they're really blasting. And that is fun. So like yeah, I think that like if tanks did more damage and had moments where they like really can do some damage, that would probably help. You're responsible for leading the dungeon groups and pulls and blamed if things go wrong. I did say something similar to that. I mean, I had a bit more color and a bit more detail, and like it's a bit more of an intelligent take. But like that is, I think, part of the problem. Your self-sustain is trash now. I think that's true. That is true. Tanks have felt more fun when you're able to just kind of like live on your own more, and like you don't have to rely on the healer as much. That is very true, especially when you're pugging and you're playing with healers that like you don't necessarily know, or like you're not necessarily comfortable playing with them because you've never played with them before, and like they're not comfortable with you and how you play as a tank. Like it creates this like more of a need for synergy between the tank and the healer. And if you're pugging, that's just like a bit more of a dice roll every single key. I'm an average CE guild. You aren't getting any loot. Yeah, I mean that's true as well. But like I don't think that matters too much. But hey, I'm not about that either. I think tanks should all get a bonus roll every week. You get one decent tank only trinket. I think this is also true, although I don't think this necessarily changes the way people are. This sounds like a tank player who has the opinion of these things. I don't think regular people who aren't tanking are thinking about this as a reason for why they're not playing tank. But like nonetheless, this is true. The tank trinkets have generally speaking sucked, and like they also seem to be getting worse every single season. Back in Shadowlands, and you had the trinket from the 9, I think it was. It was like that big shield, and then there was like another one that was like another defensive trinket. I think the one that came from Streets, like Codex or something. You just have these like really cool defensive trinkets, and when you have a strong on-use defensive trinket, that can really like smooth or like fill some of the holes that some tanks have that others don't. Like if you're playing a classic VDH, or sometimes feels like you're kind of like out of defensives to push. It's nice to have an on-use trinket that you can rely on. If you're the current meta tank, instant invites. If not, you're not. Again, I don't think this is true. Like at a plus 10 level, to be honest, I don't agree with that. I pretty much get instant invites on my tank, and I think you can also just simply like run your own key. Like I'm pretty undergeared on my alt tanks, and I just run my own key, and it's fine. Everyone signs up immediately because there's a tank. Like I don't really think that's true. This is kind of the same point as his last point, which I think is also, like I said, is wrong. So I'll stick with Dells. I mean, hey, Fabled Vanquisher right here. I mean, I feel you. I mean, I feel you. One of 4,000. Okay, let's. This will be the last commentary because I think these takes are all pretty bad. I gave up tanking him up when it first launched. Ran a pally tank in late TBC, all through. And a good part of Kata. Okay. I also stopped playing Pally and Kata. Did Karazhan TBC ran all heroic dungeons except for the Oculus? Why, was a little tough for you? The Oculus was a little bit hard for you? Toxicity was always there every expansion, but it got turned up to 9,000 with the Pug Finder and Late Wrath and Kata. Okay. Saw Pally to red exclusively in mid Kata before Isle of Thunder dropped. Never looked back. Wanted to have fun. Not get yelled at by emos, mouth breathing, neck pierce. Holy. And people would turn into the beast over one extra polar taking two slots. I mean, this guy said it himself. He didn't even do the Oculus spit. Like, you just suck. I mean, that's what he's trying to avoid, but I think that's a real thing too. You know what? Let me leave you with this take, this final Loco take. I said what I said, which is that the tank has a lot of a spotlight on them. A lot of people don't want to tank because they don't want to be the public speaker. They don't want to be the person in the front of the class. They don't want to be the one who everybody looks at for advice and for leadership. Not a lot of people like that, but there's one other reason why people don't want to play tank, and this guy said it, and I didn't say it yet, and I'm happy. Well, he didn't say it, but he's demonstrating it. A lot of people are not very good at the game, and a lot of people are able to skirt by on being carried by other people. This is a game where there's not really an MMR system. This is a game that is pretty much exclusively group content. And not only is it group content, but the groups are pretty large. If you do Mythic Raid, you're playing with 19 other people. It's pretty easy to carry one person through Mythic Raid. My first Mythic Raid guild in Shadowlands literally killed the first three bosses with 19 people because we just couldn't fill a roster. So we could easily carry somebody. You could be that carry, and you don't know it until you play tank. As soon as you start playing the tank class, you will realize that you suck at the game, and everybody hates you, and all you've been doing is hiding behind the veil of like sitting in the back of the bus, pretending that like, oh, this bus driver sucks. This bus driver sucks. But when it's time for you to drive the bus, you don't even have a driver's license. You suck at the game, and you never knew that until you tanked. And I think a lot of these comments are demonstrating that. I don't want to be yelled at. Hey, yell at me. I don't care, like I will learn and I will get better. A lot of people just simply don't want to look in the mirror and playing as a tank, you can't hide from that mirror because everybody's putting it up in your face saying, "This is you. You pull an extra pack. This route is too slow. This route isn't lining up with my cooldowns." Like you can't hide from the fact that you don't know what you're doing as a tank. Whereas when you're playing other specs or other roles in the game, and I haven't really spoken about healer too much here. I'm not going to get into that right now. You just can't hide from it as a tank, and so many people in this game are pretty hard carried. An example of this, just to demonstrate and send that point home, is that when you watch like high level keys, these DPS players are doing so much damage. Then you'll do your own key that is like instead of like 20, let's say it's a 17, let's say it's a 15. Your DPS players are doing nowhere near as much damage as the good players. But the thing is, that's not going to stop the key from being timed and being successful. But it just goes to demonstrate the fact that like there's so many DPS players who really aren't very good at what they do. They're nowhere near the elite, sure. The elite are another story. That's fair. But they're not even close to it. And they can just get carried through by playing with other people who are better than they are, and they will like never have to deal with the fact that like actually you failed this key because you only had 4 kicks in the entire dungeon and everybody else had 30 kicks, 25 kicks. That doesn't show up until the end of the key, and at that point the group has disbanded, and that person who doesn't have any kicks probably isn't even looking at the kicks, and that's why they only have about 3 or 4 kicks, and they're just going to go back to their guild and be like, tanks this season suck. So I think that's the real problem, and I don't really think it's a problem that's super fixable. I think that just is the way that it is, and hey, you pick the DPS class and you get to sit in queue. That is what it is. Anyway, God bless our tank players. God bless our healers too. I mean, that'll pay. Maybe that'll be the next Loco take. We'll see. We'll see. DPS players that can fucking suck it though.